So we vote and then we're done for today, right? About 10 minutes?
I wish it was 10 minutes. Hey, y'all, welcome. Hey, Earl.
Hey, Rachel.
How you doing?
Oh, well enough.
Well, good. Well enough is good. Wish it was better, but we'll take it.
Still playing the quarantine, so you know.
Yeah, I think I don't think you're alone in that, Earl. I think there's probably other folks too. I don't know if that makes you feel better or worse.
It's bound to happen to all of us at some point, it seems like. So.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Let me see. Hey, Kelia, thanks for joining us today. Oh, you're muted.
Ha. How are y'all? Sorry about that.
No, good. We're so glad that you're here, you and Pat. Pat was on with us a little bit earlier, so we got to say hello to him already.
Great.
Hey, Alex, thanks for joining us today from Washington Parish. Let me see. And hey, Steve. Hey, Larry. How y'all doing today?
Very good. How are you?
Doing well, thanks.
I don't have fabulous. I don't have anything to complain about myself, so. Let me see. Hey, Heidi, I don't think I said hello to you yet, or Richard or Chris, hello. Y'all doing good today? Thanks for getting us started with that. If you can, please put your name as well as affiliation or parish that you live in, whatever you'd like to do in the chat pod, that would be fantastic. We're going to give people just about another minute to get on here before we start with our intros and things of that nature. Hey, Lindsay, thanks for joining us today. I see we've got Ben as well, and Honora, hello. Oh, and there's Drew as well. Thank y'all for being with us today. Welcome, Rami. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If not, feel free to correct me. Rami LaCour. Welcome, Amanda. Welcome, Tom. Oh, I think you might have just corrected me and I missed it.
It's Romy.
Romy, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll write that down so I don't forget. Okay. Well, we are at 1 o'clock right now. I know that we're waiting on some other steering committee members to join us. I think I had conversations with at least everybody that I could get a hold of over the last couple of days, so we should have some more folks rolling on. What you're going to see is from time to time I might be looking at my phone, but it is certainly not because I'm not paying attention. It's because I have this nifty little timer that keeps us going so that I do not spend too much time on one section and that we're really respectful of everybody's time. So thank you, Evelyn. Certainly if people are having challenges with Zoom, please feel free to put that in the chat pod for us to begin to resolve. So we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to start from the top here. Here we go. Let's present. Here we go. Okay, so thank y'all for being here today. This is the Region 7 Regional Steering Committee meeting. My name is Rachel Sanderson. I work at Capital Region Planning Commission as the Region 7 Watershed Coordinator. There's a lot of work that goes into putting these presentations together, including any of the documents that you see ahead of time, as well as these slides. And lots of prep time in meetings. So also want to give a special thanks to Kim Marasek, who's also a Capital Region Planning Commission, who provided a lot of support for building out today's content and have some specific roles with live note taking today. Evelyn Campo with the Office of Community Development, who's going to be providing some facilitation help as well as Zoom logistics, as we've already mentioned. Dr. Thomas Dowsett with LSU, who also helps provide support with some of the content and is also going to be providing some contextual information for y'all to think about with a couple of questions today. We also have Lindsay Lamana with LSU, who is going to be taking notes for us today. So big thanks to her. We have Kelia Bingham, who's here with Acadiana Planning Commission, and she's going to be talking a little bit about what they're doing in Region 5. We also have Pat Gordon, who's with South Central Planning. He's going to be talking a little bit about what's going on in Region 6. And then we have Tom Hazley, who's with the New Orleans Regional Planning Commission, and he'll be talking about what's going on in Region 8. So for today, we've already started on moving through the introductions and meeting logistics, so that's going to be the first part of our agenda. Go ahead and move y'all's beautiful faces off to the right-hand part of my screen so I can see better. We're going to do a very quick recap on where we've been as a group, just kind of getting people caught up to speed. We're going to talk about the provisional governance recommendation, and we'll go into more detail about what that process looks like, because the main thing for today's conversation is that we are going to vote on that document as a steering committee specifically. If we have time, we are going to go through a section called Moving Forward, which talks about some of the next steps that we're going to be going through now that we have this provisional governance recommendation. And as always, we have public comments and then a section called Closeout, where we just very simply walk through the adoption of the meeting minutes as well as to adjourn. So just as a friendly reminder to everybody on this call, this is technically a public meeting. So we do adhere to the Louisiana Open Public Meeting requirements. It's observable to the public. There's the opportunity for public comments. Please, at any time, know that you can put your responses in the chat pod. Oh, hello, Devin. I see that you posted them here, and Bobby Joe. Thank y'all for being with us. And we're also going to record this meeting. Last time we had a couple of issues, but this time we're going to have video and audio. Ooh, there we go. We would love to see your faces if possible. So if you do have a camera and you do feel comfortable with that, please turn your video on. And just as a reminder, we've got a couple of reminder slides in here as well. These are Region 7 goals that are defined in the guiding principles framework. These are meant to add on to what is already been presented in the Watershed Initiative Phase 1 reports, as well as other documentation. But they range from everything from equitable flood risk reduction to addressing the urban-rural split and resource disparity. If you go online to our website at crpcla.org and you click on the Region 7 Watershed tab, you'll be able to find documents such as the Guiding Principles Framework, where this is laid out in much greater detail. As a reminder, the Regional Steering Committee, as it currently exists, has two specific deliverables. So one of those is to develop a long-term governance structure, and that provisional recommendation, which we're voting on today, is actually due to the state on the 31st, so just a few short days from today. And then the second deliverable is to identify projects to recommend for $5 million worth of funding, and that's due summer of this year. And so we wanted to say to this group, and I'm going to have Chuck and Ross also say thank you, but just on behalf of the team, thank you for being here. It means the world to us, and we know that this has been a long journey that we're still continuing on. We also have a very fun poll where it's just, would you rather eat your favorite meal every day for the rest of your life or eat a different meal every day for the rest of your life? And while people are filling that out, Chuck and Ross, I don't know if y'all wanted to say anything as our chairs.
Sure. Just reiterate what you said. This is one, very important milestone that we're going to try and meet today for the January 31st deadline. And appreciate everyone's help and assistance, being the consultant team and everybody who works in the background and the regional steering committee members. So, and quickly I will say, I'm at home today in quarantine. If I turn my camera off, that means I had to walk away. My daughter's class got quarantined. First time since the school year started. So can't believe we made it this far. So I know everybody's working through a similar situation. So again, appreciate everyone being here.
Well, I don't know what I can add to what they have already said, but just to thank everybody. I know to have a series of 2.5-hour meetings sometimes gets old, but I want to thank everybody for their time and efforts they put and the thought they put into this. So that it's not just the time in the meeting, there's time outside the meetings that you have to put into this to invest in the process.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, y'all. And I want to acknowledge us on the chat. Bridget Bailey is here with Tangipahoa, and then I also saw Major Coleman with St. Helena. So welcome, y'all. I'm sure there are other people who are filtering in. Welcome. We are going to end this poll and share the results. It looks like this group likes variety. Personally, that's what I would have selected too. I love to try. So cool. That poll actually, I think, tells us a lot about other folks and kind of, you know, just the way that they like to live every day. So thank y'all. Go to the next slide. As a reminder, we do have ground rules for this group. And ground rules are simply rules of engagement for how we want to interact with each other in this space. So we do recognize that we're all folks who are working to kind of build a community with one another, which means that there's going to be a lot of opportunities for us to have honest conversations with each other. So having some rules of engagement that are kind of navigational beacons for how we want to interact and engage with each other is important. So the first ground rule is to be brief and meaningful when voicing your opinion. The second is to seek common ground and understanding, not problem and conflict. The third is to consider what serves the benefit of the entire region. And the fourth, which is a new addition from last time, is when presenting a challenge, offer a solution. And if folks are having difficulties getting beyond the challenge to the solution, we might open it up to the rest of the group to see if there's some suggestions. We're also going to be incorporating a new practice, which is called an idea marina. So if we are finding ourselves getting kind of distracted by topics that are really important, but not necessarily relevant to the specific discussion at hand, what we're going to do is record that in the back end in what we call an idea marina for revisiting at a different point in time. And then I think for these reminders on the mission and vision, I'm going to toss this over to Chuck and Ross to give us this quick reminder.
So I will start it off with the mission. It is to reduce flood risk, improve floodplain management throughout the state, and to maximize natural and beneficial functions of the floodplain.
Thanks, Chuck. And then the vision that this steering committee has come up with is envisions a future with less flood risk, healthier natural environments, and resilience practices that are responsive to the needs of our communities and to our evolving environment. So yeah, again, very important stuff. We have an opportunity here to take this watershed initiative, regional steering committee, and continue on with meeting our milestones from the state, and trying to, I guess, accomplish this mission and vision. So again, with the regional steering committee members, I think we can do it. So appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks all for that grounding. It's really important. Oh my goodness, I don't know if y'all can hear that. It was asking if I could hear a ringtone. I heard it, I don't know about y'all. So next thing that we're gonna do is roll call. And what I'm gonna do, we're gonna do this just a little bit differently than what we've done in the past, because we are gonna be voting today. So we're gonna do the same way that we normally do. I'm gonna remove these couple of examples here, where we're gonna go alphabetical order by affiliation and then to the regional representatives in alphabetical order. So do we have Mike Enlow and or Ron Savoy with Ascension Parish?
Hey, good afternoon, Mike's here.
Hey, Mike, are you going to be voting with us today?
Yes, I will.
Okay, perfect. And quick explanation, for the vote for the provisional governance recommendation, we just want to make sure that it's one person voting per affiliation. So we're going to record that on here. Mike, are you tuning in today with a computer, or how are you joining us today?
I'm on a computer.
Perfect. And that's important for when we get to voting later on, I promise. All right, so we have Tom Stevens and or Fred Rayford. Okay, not hearing from them, but if somebody sees them on the participant list, can one of the team members please let me know? Do we have James Stewart or Joni Stone from East Feliciana? And then John Clark, I know you told me yesterday that you were going to be joining us via phone. Are you on the line? You may have to press *6 to unmute if you're on the phone.
Here.
Hey,
Hello,
John,
can you hear me, Rachel? Okay, cool.
We sure can. Thank you. And then I think Mark Harrell or Steve Kistler with Livingston.
Steve Kistler's there.
Hey, Steve, thanks for joining us. Are you joining via computer or phone, or how are you tuning in today?
Computer.
Perfect. Thank you. And Earl, we heard you earlier, but can you let us know how you're tuning in today, if it's computer or phone? And if it's the phone, can you specify if you're using the Zoom app?
I am here. I am on the Zoom app on an iPhone.
Perfect. Thank you. And Major, I think you wrote in the chat pod that you were here. Can you let us know how you're tuning in today?
Yes, I'm on the phone and on the computer, but in about an hour, we have to get off the computer, but I'll stay on the phone.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us, Major, and to everybody else. Do we have Ryan Donahue or Ryan LaRousse with St. James? Okay, not hearing them. I know they said that they had something come up. Devin Foyle or Renee Pastrick with St. John?
This is Devin Foyle tuning in on a computer, and I'll be the voting member today.
Thanks, Devin. Much appreciated. And I know we've got Ross here, and Ross, you're on your computer, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect. And I know we've got Bridget. Bridget, how are you tuning in with us today?
On my computer. Can you guys hear me?
Sure can. It's nice to hear your voice. All right, and I know we have Bobby Joe on the line. Bobby Joe, can you let us know how you're tuning in today?
Computer.
Computer, thank you. And Gary Migo or Emily Cobb?
This is Gary. I'm on a computer.
Hey, Gary, nice to hear your voice also. Everybody's really, thank you. And I think I saw Dietmar join, and we also have Larry. So can y'all let me know who from your group's going to be voting today?
Already me, Dietmar.
Perfect. Thanks for joining us, Dietmar. And I think you're on your computer. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Do we have Karen Zito or Diane Baum?
Yes, Karen, and I'm on my computer.
Perfect. And I know we've got Chuck. Chuck, are you on your computer today?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. And then Ronnie Carter or Kim Coates, I think I saw y'all both sign in. Can you let me know who's going to vote for y'all today?
Ronnie Carter, computer.
Awesome.
I'm on the phone and Ronnie can vote.
Okay, great. Thanks, y'all. And I know that seems silly, but we're going to actually be sending out a voting form specifically to make sure that we only have one vote per affiliation. And so for people who are just on the phone, we want to make sure that there's an opportunity for them to vote through different methods. So thanks, y'all, for hanging in there with us for that particular part. And thanks for being with us again. So a quick recap of where we've been. This is meant to help as a reminder for folks who have been on this journey with us, and then to also provide just some background and contextual information for people who are just joining us or who maybe missed some information in the past. So as a quick recap, this group has actually been meeting since about May. The first couple of meetings were really grounding meetings, so setting expectations. And we really started to get some pretty heavy work done starting in July and August. So in August, we created a vision, values, and goals for this region. So that's the guiding principles framework that we've discussed. In September, we started to talk about root causes for flooding and what we thought we could impact and how we could transform those challenges into opportunities and then into actions. In October, we talked about the region's set and boundaries, and people on the steering committee had described, unless there's a significant reason to do so, don't change them. In November, we actually had the privilege of being with each other 2 times because thanks to our record-breaking and historic hurricane season, we had to move some meetings around. But in November, we had a discussion around funding, among other things, and figured out that we want to fund projects, programs, and planning efforts And we want the ability to obtain external funding resources and to also have the opportunity for long-term stable funding. The second November meeting right before Thanksgiving, we discussed potential functions, which has a wide range of things. So everything from providing technical assistance to guidance and coordination and opportunities for outreach and engagement, among many other things. December 15th, we talked about a couple of different governance models. And we learned from that we specifically want there to be space for technical experts, elected officials, and everyday citizens to have roles. And that we want to create something that's strong but adaptive. In our last meeting, we started to move more explicitly towards a provisional governance recommendation. So everything that was stated from the previous meetings, kind of compiling that into what this document looks like. And we actually discussed what could be included in the regional summary and the roadmap sections of that document. So I think we wanted to provide a quick reminder here. I'm going to toss it over to Ross for this particular section.
Yep, just kind of recap what the executive order from Governor John Bel Edwards stated back in 2018. And again, I feel like it's a very innovative concept, and I'm not going to read this whole document, but just point out a few key points. A being promoting a unified effort built on a solid foundation of scientific and engineering principles to address flooding issues across the state. D, increasing state and local resilience to flooding by working to improve response to flooding and reduce instances, damages, and amount of time needed to recover from flooding. E, creating a path for the state and its various jurisdictions and political subdivisions to coordinate at statewide and watershed level to maximize flood risk reduction. Let's pop over to G, promoting actions including legislative, administrative, and regulatory where appropriate to enhance watershed and floodplain management in Louisiana. Skip on down to I, facilitating watershed-based floodplain management, working to create watershed-bounded entities across the state. And finally, with J, developing an approach to watershed-based floodplain management that is recognized as a model for others nationally and internationally. And we really have a great opportunity here to do that. So if we can all focus, and I know we all have been, and we'll continue to do so, it's going to be, hopefully it's going to be great. So we shall see. Let's keep working.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. And I think something that has been brought up in the last couple of meetings is just the reminder that, you know, the 1.2 billion CDBG MIT mitigation funds is an initial investment. So we're not doing this work specifically to build out a structure to spend that money. That's one thing that comes with this, but really we're building out a structure that's meant to be long-term. All right, Evelyn, I'm going to toss it over to you.
Thanks so much, y'all, and thank you for kind of walking through, just reminding us of those important points in the executive order. You know, one thing I also want to just refresh all of our memories on is that, you know, we're working within this larger framework, right? And so one thing that we came into this knowing is that we can't make a one-size-fits-all solution for all the regions, but also knowing that, you know, where Region 7 ends, another region picks up, right, on each of our sides. And so, you know, we do need to be, we need to recognize that we're working within the framework of others within the state. And just that we also need to think through the fact that enablement of a long-term watershed body may leave us some room to grow. As you can see in this image, and I know we've talked about this many times, so everybody's familiar, but, you know, it may be that, you know, this body is enabled with some important responsibilities and that they kind of scope their initial work very tightly within that. And that's shown as their actual purview, right, when they start out, but then they can grow into a role that better fits the needs of the region as those needs change and evolve. And so I'm excited to see that happen.
Thanks, Evelyn. That's really helpful grounding, especially with a couple of the conversations that we're going to have to get pretty detailed on today. Oh my goodness. There we go. I have a very sensitive mouse that I'm getting used to still. And sometimes it seems like it double clicks. It's quite an amazing tool and also makes things challenging. So with the provisional governance recommendation, we want to let y'all know very specifically up front, again, that, this is not the final, it's not the final document. It's a provisional recommendation, and this is a milestone marker moment for us to start to go out and say, hey, these are some of the ideas that we have, and get some really robust feedback on that, so that we can actually revisit and refine those recommendations over the summer. And that's specifically from the regional perspective. I'll leave it to Evelyn to talk a little bit about the state.
Sure, thanks so much. I mean, so like you can see with this graphics and the timeline, the state and the region are working on kind of similar work at the same time, right? But it's different in a few important ways, which is that the state is looking right now at state agency alignment and how the state interacts with the regions, right? And so that's what you're seeing in this indication that the state is working on operational guidance. But then also, once this region reaches their recommendation, and once all the recommendations from all the other regions are kind of in and collected together, then the state will kind of respond to that input. And so I know many of you have been very excited, and well, what does that process look like? And, what can we see over the next 2 months? And so we are getting to a really critical point. As Rachel said, one of our main jobs going forward is going to be for the members on this committee to kind of explain the recommendations to the larger communities that they work in. And then, part of the state's big job at that point too is to help those regions take that next step and become formally enabled, and to do that work of years 2 and 3, of the coalition going forward. And so we're very excited about that. We're looking forward to it.
Yeah, so it's a journey, y'all. We're making it to the, I think, peak of perhaps one of the mountains. There are a few along the way, but we're going to go together. All right. I like this. We're ahead of time on my timer, which means we get some extra time to have discussion, which is great. We're now going to move into the provisional governance recommendation section. We're going to have support from quite a few folks on this particular section. But what we really wanted to do was kind of lay out the process that we're going to go through today for this. So everybody should have received a link that brought them to the provisional governance recommendation. I'm going to stop sharing for one moment and make sure that I pull that up again so that we can make sure that every single person has that accessible to them in the chat pod. So in the chat pod, I just shared the provisional governance recommendation with everybody. So you should be able to view and see that. Go back into presentation mode here. And what we're going to do is really have, kind of 3 steps to today's meeting. So step 1, we're going to address a couple of items in question where there wasn't necessarily consistency among steering committee members during previous meetings. So we're going to provide some more information, have more robust discussion. Something else in step 1 that's missing from this circle, which is apologies on my end, is that we're also going to go through some of the changes that were made based on the January 7th discussion, very minor language changes, as well as some of the recommendations that have been brought up through comments between when the provisional draft was sent out, or the draft provisional governance recommendation was sent out, and today. Actually, I started incorporating those at about 7 o'clock this morning, so we'll view those in live time. And then step 2, once we get through that particular section, we're going to actually walk through the provisional governance recommendation together. So it's going to actually include what does the more finalized language look like based on all of the edits and discussions from today, as well as previous discussions. And we're going to walk through specifically each section of that together as a group to make sure that people have a full understanding of what's being proposed for the provisional governance recommendation, and then what we're going to be voting on. That 3rd step is specifically going to be to vote on the provisional governance recommendation. That's only the steering committee members. So there's only going to be up to 17 people, 1 person per representative slot that's going to be voting today. And we have a specific way to vote for that today. So specifically, abstaining isn't going to be an option today. For the steering committee members, there's an option to vote yay or nay on that specifically. So follow along in the process. You'll see these colored circles in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. So they'll denote 1, 2, or 3 for each step. Okay. So before we get into the nitty gritty of some of the explanations, we're going to actually toss it over to our friends at Regions 5, 6, and 8 to talk a little bit about the decisions that they've been thinking about. Region 5 is in process. We there's that Region 6 and 8 have already made their vote. So we got Keelia Bingham, if you want to come off mute, and when you're ready, I think you have 3 slides total. So just tell me next slide.
All right. Thank you, Rachel, for inviting Region 5 to your meeting. So yeah, we're still working on our governance recommendation. A little different. We have a steering committee next month, February 11th, and so we'll officially adopt the provisional recommendation. So we are providing a draft provisional governance recommendation to the state by the 31st. I kind of highlighted the sort of major points of our recommendation. So our coalition tasks, looking at creating watershed hazard mitigation plans, obviously policies based on data and science, very important. We're looking to develop call it regional CRS, the community rating system streamline strategy, basically establishing a regional user group that has happened in other regions. A lot of rural communities aren't participating in the CRS, and they should. It would be advantageous, but they might not have the staff or capacity. And I think it's a little hard to get started. So we want to kind of have that, provide that resource. We also are looking at regional watershed-based permit and permitting process. This would be construction. We want, if we do have this permit, to ally with the Army Corps of Engineers permitting process. It does not include planning and development permits. This is just something to help. I was discussing with Pat Gordon earlier. No one wants to create more red tape. So something that we can streamline and help all the parishes in the regions. Coordinate local drainage districts to plan or fund projects. For Region 5, we have a lot of water districts. We have gravity drainage districts, levee districts. I think it's about 100 now. So we want to definitely involve and coordinate with them. Assistant funding for long-term to OMN projects. And we have in our Region 5, this is a separate project than LWI. We have the Kittiana Regional Gauge Network that involves 8 parishes in our region. And so we want to operate and maintain that regional gauge network. And this will complement and enhance LWI's gauge network. Recommended authorities, obviously, cooperating with other government agencies. Like all of us, the ability to generate revenue, whatever that looks like. I know we have a lot of options, the state, reading through the white paper and funding. So thanks LWI, a lot of options there. Obviously, we want to oversee a regional planning process. And like I said earlier, an authority to issue permits. Next slide, please. So our roadmap, looking at the coalition, how that can be formed. Right now, I think Acadian Planning Commission would be the agency, would be the staff, and we'll establish, I have quotes, agreements, whatever that exactly means. We're going to hash that out later. With the University of Louisiana, they have the Louisiana Watershed Flood Center, and the Tesh Vermilion Freshwater District will be agreements or partners with the coalition. As far as representation of the coalition, we're looking at landmass based. Right now, we're kind of looking at the idea of management and planning districts. We have 11 parishes for management districts and maybe 5 parishes for planning districts. And this could change later as we're looking at funding. And the coalition to be made up of public representatives, kind of what we have now, district committee and maybe a couple of technical subcommittees. For now, the boundaries are to remain the same. Obviously, that can change as we go forward, or of course, depending on funding sources as for future long-term sustainability. I think one more slide, please. And for state recommendations, it was agreed upon that we wanted a state-enabled authority for legislation and fiscal authority, state having general oversight. Also, that increased authority to develop those minimum standards set by the state for all regions. So to kind of level the playing field, example, having that regional watershed construction permit that would align with the Army Corps. And that is the basis of our government recommendation so far.
Yeah, thanks, Keelia. Definitely looking forward to y'all's vote on February 11th. So thanks for just being here with us today. I know there's a lot of different things to consider. Ross, I see you're off mute. Is there something you'd like to say?
Yeah, I
Go
just wanna
ahead.
say thanks. I mean, that was awesome. I just want to say thanks, and that gives me a lot of things to think about. So I think, and I haven't heard the other two regions yet. So if this is the beginning, it's gonna be pretty awesome. So thanks again.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelia. All right, I think Pat, always South Central, we've got you on deck.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pat Gordon, I'm the Planning Director.
Oh, hang on one second. Pat, we're having some weird audio feedback. Is that just on my end? Evelyn, are you hearing that too?
Hey, can you hear me all right?
I'm hearing the
I'm
feedback
hearing it as
too.
well.
You may want to call in with your phone, Pat. There's an option to like switch from computer audio to phone.
Pat, is it okay if we have Evelyn work with you to troubleshoot that and we have Tom Hazley with NORPC? Okay, cool. We'll come right back to you. All right, Tom, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
You sure can.
Hey.
All right, there you go. I'm gonna be quiet now. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks everybody for having me. I tried to cram everything into one slide, so I apologize for all that digital ink. So my name is Tom Hazley. I'm a principal planner at the Regional Planning Commission in New Orleans. If you're not familiar with our region, Region 8, it's probably geographically one of the smallest regions. But of course it includes New Orleans and Jefferson Parish, St. Charles, Plaquemines and St. Bernard parishes. And actually only includes the east banks of those parishes. So we're unusually split, or I guess many of y'all are split. And some of you are also part of Region 8, some of just St. Charles, sorry. But anyways, regarding our coalition recommendations, we had these approved by our committee last week on the 21st. And for ours, a lot of our recommendations, they're fairly detailed, but I think what our recommendations covered are covered by a lot of your guiding principles that you had already created. So within that, our coalition tasks that we recommend, first of all, obviously planning. And we would like to see that at both the regional level and the sub area level. That's owing to the fact that our system is highly engineered and a lot of our watersheds are artificially separated from one another. So we do need to recognize that, but then of course we do have natural systems, especially along the coast and the wetlands. We want our planning processes to be multifaceted in that they consider not just your standard drainage studies, but also recognize some of the larger issues that we're dealing with. We want to make sure that we include innovative practices and nature-based solutions, but also recognize things like acknowledge climate change and its impact to us, and acknowledge what we can do to help mitigate that, and to acknowledge impacts, disparate impacts to disadvantaged communities, both historically and moving forward. But then more kind of nuts and bolts things like trying to minimize maintenance operation costs for parishes and municipalities. And within that planning task, we also want those to be replicable so that we can do them again in the same process for various parishes and entities within our region, but also maybe share them with other regions. The implementation side of things, I think, is one of the things we talked about most within our committee. So we mainly see our coalition functioning as an entity that would receive and distribute funds for projects, not an entity that would necessarily own and operate projects. We would not be doing direct construction. We would be essentially helping our members implement their own projects. Within that, we see ourselves kind of setting standards and incentivizing entities following those standards by making that compliance a condition of receiving funding. So in other words, if you want to get funding through this coalition, you're going to need to follow the standards that we have agreed upon as a region. So we see that as a way of implementing development standards and other types of standards, as opposed to being directly enforcing and creating standards. And then, of course, we see ourselves as a data housing entity, and also an outreach entity. And within that, as outreach, I'd like to just point out that we see ourselves not just doing public outreach, but informing elected officials and decision makers, talking to the development industry, talking to the real estate industry, but also acting as a liaison to our state and federal elected officials, kind of bringing a single regional voice to our elected officials who we don't talk to every day, and kind of acting on behalf of our members. So in terms of what the required authorities are that we see, so obviously, the ability to receive and distribute funds, regardless of the source. We see potential, hopefully new sources from the state and federal governments, but also maybe private grants, things like that. But more importantly, or just as importantly, we need the authority to act on behalf of local entities, particularly parish governments and municipalities. We recognize the fact that if we're going to be doing this work, we are essentially asking them to give us the authority to do it for them instead of them doing it themselves, which many will be happy to do, but many may not wish to do that. So that's something that we need to recognize and say that we are going to be doing something on behalf of these local entities. And then, of course, with that, we emphasize in our recommendations that we need to be given this authority by the state, but again, by the local governments as well, because the state can give us all the authority they want, depending on the legislature's whims. But if our local governments aren't willing to go along with it, then we're kind of stuck there. So we emphasize that in our recommendations. And then for the roadmap, I think from what I've heard, we've come up with something of a unique model in that we're seeking a partnership model in which there would be a single lead entity that sort of acts as the fiscal agent or the grant recipient, however you want to say that. But then the responsibilities for running the coalition are shared by different entities depending on their capabilities and available resources. So one entity may act as kind of the administrator, but then another might be the lead for technical work, another may be the lead for outreach and education. So it's kind of like a public-private partnership model that we are seeking, and we're asking within the state charter that allows us to create these coalitions that be allowed, as opposed to just having one single entity run the whole coalition. And with that, we are also saying in our recommendations that we'd like to see the regions be able to determine their own structure. I think we've heard that a few times, and I think everybody seems to agree on that not all the regions are the same. I don't think everybody wants to have to do exactly what our region is doing and vice versa. So we're asking for that. And then I'm trying to go quick. I don't want to take up all of your time, but the last thing that we include in our recommendations are specific recommendations for all the state agencies that will be working to get those authorities and to get that funding. So the first thing we are recommending is that they come up with a single strategy for how this is going to be achieved based on all the recommendations from the different regions. One thing I didn't list here, but I did say is that we want to make sure that whatever happens, we can rely on some stable long-term funding, because we can't do long-term work without having long-term planning or long-term funding. It has to be something that we can rely on, or else we're not going to be able to. If we can't guarantee that we're going to be around in 5 years, then we can't make a plan for 10 years. And then also recognizing the existing political and fiscal constraints that we have in our state. I mentioned some of it earlier with the local issues of making sure we can get their authority, but at the legislative level, that's a difficult task to get any piece of legislation passed. And we're talking about some pretty substantial stuff here, and tied to funding. So, we all know that the funding is limited at the state level, as it is everywhere. So, we want to make sure that whatever strategy that comes recognizes those realities. And then finally, feeding from that, make some contingency plans for, if we can't get that ideal level of authorization and funding, what are we going to do? What's going to happen if we don't have the funding and the authorities that we really want? What are our plans for making sure that we can still have these coalitions doing this important work, even if it's not exactly the work we want? So that was a lot. I tried to cram in a small amount of time, but hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I think that was really helpful. Thank you, Tom, for that explanation. Just really helpful to hear from you and Kelia, because we do have, y'all are neighbors. So thank you for being here and taking the time. We're going to travel back to our, we're going to travel back to our Bayou parishes, if you will, from the Big Easy and the Birdfoot back to the Bayou. So Pat, were you able to join us again?
Well, I joined on my cell phone. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Great.
That's perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I thought I'd just go ahead and try that. Yeah, I tell you what, it was enjoyable to listen to the other two presentations, because we have very similar recommendations. Not all the same, just as we have discussed before, that all the regions are different. So we have different concerns, but our watershed has 5 of the parishes that watershed 7 encompasses. And so we have 16 parishes altogether in Region 6. We held 9 regular meetings. We had 6 subcommittee meetings, and 5 of those subcommittee meetings were certified floodplain managers outreach, trying to get the floodplain managers in each one of the parishes to become certified. They have training that's going to be going on this spring. We're going to try to have 2 of them certified, and see if we can't have a certified floodplain manager in each one of our 16 parishes. And capacity came up, and certainly our coalition is willing to step up and be that CFM for the parishes that don't have the capacity, because we have 4 parishes that have about 20,000 people, and they just don't have the finances to have somebody on staff. So we're looking at the possibility of bringing on a floodplain manager to handle several of the smaller parishes and let them work on CRS and see if they can't lower their flood insurance premiums in those particular parishes. So that's been a big task for Adam LaFour, who is our CFM here at South Central Planning. But Rachel, I was glad that you brought up the watershed regions dateline, because that was the first thing that I brought up at our meeting yesterday. By the way, they did pass our recommendations yesterday, but that was one of the first items that I brought up in the meeting, was that, hey guys, this is just the foundation recommendations. We're going to be moving into the engagement and outreach in the next couple of months, and then thereafter refine the recommendations based off of the input from the public, stakeholders, and especially our elected officials. And this brought up some concern from some of the board members, because they didn't want a consulting team to be the lead for the outreach and engagement to the elected officials in the different parishes. And so Mort Black and a couple other members were very instrumental in getting the point across to OCD that the point of contact in each one of the parishes should be the steering committee member selected by the parish president or the governing body, and let them be the ones to set up the meetings and explain what the watershed initiative is all about. And let's speak with one voice. So I think that got across, and hopefully that'll take place. But we did have 3 exercises in 9 of the meetings. And out of those exercises, there were numerous surveys. And the surveys for the governance entailed who does the work, what consists of the work, and how does the work get done. So after we got the results from these surveys, we set up a subcommittee that took that information and compiled it into a recommendation based off the template that the state had submitted us. And so I guess the subcommittee must have met for 3 hours, hashed it out, and it was probably the best meeting we had so far, because we all met in person too. We actually socially distanced ourselves at least 10 feet apart. We have a large room at South Central Planning, and we just went through the recommendations, and it worked out very well. But just some of the outcomes from the recommendations were that we felt the coalition should develop regional watershed plans. They should align local ordinances and standards to manage flood reduction. They should support local jurisdictions with technical assistance and provide capacity, assist with firm map amendments, help with the administrative burden of working with FEMA in the flood zones, advocate on behalf of localities at federal level, coordinate with federal entities. And then project implementation, serve as a clearinghouse who can find supplemental funding for watershed projects, implement regional project O&M plans, review major projects for upstream and downstream impacts, and data and modeling. The coalition should be tasked with housing and operating the Louisiana Watershed Initiative model for Region 6. Fortunately, here at South Central Planning, we do have large computer capacity because of our software development that we do at South Central Planning. We also would like to create or update firms based on the upcoming models. And then outreach and engagement, I've gone over that already. And so some of the recommended authorities for the coalition, the authority to cooperate or contract with other government agencies is essential. But let me get to the meat and potatoes of the roadmap here, which will be submitted this afternoon. They did elect and recommend that South Central Planning shall be the facilitator at all meetings of the coalition and shall perform the administrative functions related to the work. The coalition should be enabled by legislation under the state charter, and that all the watershed coalitions throughout the state should be authorized by a single charter. Also, it was recommended that the coalition should be primarily composed of public entity representatives. That was very clear by all the representatives that, when it comes to flooding, who gets the rap? The elected officials do every time. So they should be the ones to have representation on the coalition. Now, they did decide, though, that other agencies, local governments, national estuary programs, levee districts, drainage districts, higher education institutes, research institutes, water districts, and coastal institutes could all play a part in this. But they could play a part in this by participating in a technical or advisory committee. So it would be set up very similar to the MPO, where the MPO, the policy committee, is set up with elected officials strictly, and then the technical advisory groups are made up of those professionals that have expertise in specific fields. The coalition should have oversight by the established state agency for the watershed initiative. So we would be looking for a specific agency that would have oversight for all the coalitions. The regional watershed boundaries should be recognized legislatively. And if it were to be changed, then it should be changed through legislation, not just by the whim of a couple of coalitions shifting a boundary. The coalition should have the ability to explore and maintain all options for funding, and the state should lead the effort in drafting the legal elements. Now, I can tell you that we have 2 attorneys on board at South Central Planning, and we have every intention of working with the state on this legislation, but we don't believe that we should put together a draft and give it to the state and tell them that this is what we believe needs to take place. One of the, I guess the biggest controversies we had yesterday was the development of regulations. And I want to go over that again because the same member, one of the same members is on this call, and he'll hear the same answer I gave yesterday, or explanation, is that if the state were to develop regulations and said that the coalition was mandated to enforce those regulations, we would have a definite problem with that. The coalition, Region 6, would not be in favor of that. But if there were development standards set up by the Watershed Coalition, and for some reason one of the communities didn't have the capacity, certainly the coalition could step in and provide that capacity with the approval of the local community or the parish. And I mean, it wasn't a heated debate, but it was good debate. It was good to air that out and talk about that, because I'm not aware of any of our members wanting to implement any mandates by the state that would not be acceptable by the local communities. So that's pretty much our recommendations. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. You know, I think it's really helpful. I've had the opportunity to read through Yale's documents, and hearing it from you is also really, really helpful to just listen in. And I hope that it was helpful for the steering committee as well. And I hope it didn't provide confusion, but we thought that it was necessary for y'all to get some context. So thank you again, Keelia, Pat, and Tom, our neighbors out in Acadiana, down in the bayou, and then at the Big Easy and Birdfoot. Thank y'all for being here.
Yeah, I just want to say the same thing, Rachel, just to the group from the other regions. I mean, yeah, it was great. So I appreciate it. And I'm sure the rest of the committee does as well.
Okay, well, I'm going to leave now then, Rachel.
Do what you got to do. Feel free to take care of business, y'all. We've had what we need from you, but you know where to find us. Thank you.
Bye.
All right. So what we're going to do now is actually go through that provisional governance recommendation itself. And what we wanted to do was be really, really specific and transparent about a couple of edits that have been made over time. So specifically, January 7, whenever we had our last meeting, what we did was we had some language that was put into slides. And based on that, we shifted some of the language for the purpose of the provisional governance recommendation. So you can think of these as edits that took place based on the January 7th discussions that occurred before we sent out the provisional governance recommendation draft. These are going to be reflected in the document that the steering committee was sent, and that is also online at our website. So a couple of changes that we're going to go through just to be transparent about is we shifted to using the use of Region 7 watershed body instead of council, commission, committee, coalition, because we know that some people have thoughts or ideas about what those things mean. From a legal perspective, there's not a broad ranging legal definition, and we wanted to make sure that we were leaving it up to this committee to decide what the eventual naming would be based on what they think is most appropriate. Second, within the regional summary part of the document, there's a couple of subsections in there. specific to the planning and development regulation section, and you'll see some other edits that were recommended after we sent that draft provisional governance recommendation that we're going to go through in a minute. But to change under planning and development regulation, the text that previously said provide oversight for regional planning processes, a recommendation to shift that to guidance and coordination. We also saw the language shift from regions should not issue development standards, but the state should adopt minimum development standards, shift to regions should not administer development standards, but the state should adopt minimum development standards based on local environmental planning and risk factors. I think this specifically goes to a conversation that took place on the 7th, where people were saying that, development standards aren't one size fits all and that the local context should be incorporated. In terms of recommended authorities, there was one addition.
Rachel,
Sure.
quick question. I'm sorry, maybe you just said this, but I want to make sure that I ask just in case. For anyone on the phone or anyone who maybe hasn't read the recommendation in full recently, we're going to read through that pretty shortly here, right? So just bear with us, folks. If you maybe can't remember exactly where all this fits in, we're about to read through it like as amended, right?
Thanks, Evelyn. Yes, you held me accountable to that. This is why we have a team, because my brain isn't going to remember every single thing. So thank you, Evelyn. And I will also put the link to the provisional governance recommendation back into the chat just in case it got lost somewhere. And the next part is under the recommended authorities. And the addition was the authority to receive, manage, and distribute funds from governmental, private, or nonprofit sources, including the authority to set new policy or set policy on how funds will be distributed. Oops. See, it's a sensitive mouse, y'all. That's to say, maybe I shouldn't use it for these meetings. All right. Those are the few changes. We're going to pull this up and go through it in live time, as Evelyn has just mentioned. So it's kind of one bucket of edits. The second bucket is after we sent out the draft provisional governance recommendation, we received some feedback from folks, specifically folks who are on the steering committee. And so what you're going to see are kind of three categories of that feedback. The feedback was really great, and I think there's a lot of value to it. And we also want to make sure that for the purpose of today's discussion, we're getting into the level of detail that's necessary for the provisional governance recommendation, since it's due in a couple of days. You'll see kind of three categories of detail for feedback. So the first is detailed feedback that's better suited for later iterations of the governance recommendation and or other supporting documents. So we're going to have those comments and feedback collected for the purpose of incorporating into future iterations and or bylaws or decision-making matrices, whatever might be the most appropriate use. There's also the second bucket, which is feedback that has been incorporated and will be shown today. So mostly these are language changes that are more in alignment with what the text actually says. So some people have really good edits and suggestions. And then the third bucket are a couple of things that we think should be discussed today. And there's specifically 2 points of feedback on that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to present some of the feedback to consider at a later date. We're not going to necessarily spend time on discussing these at this moment in time, but we do want to be transparent and show y'all what that feedback kind of looks like, so that in the future, we can directly thread back and say, this feedback comes from this moment in time, and this is how we're addressing it. So there's a couple of different categories. So projects, and I'm just going to read through one of these. I'm going to leave these up. Consider having the steering committee be the project recommending body to agencies, so it's one point of contact to do approval and more. That's one piece of feedback that was received. Under the authority to cooperate and contract with other governmental agencies, one piece of feedback that we got was to have the governance structure be similar to safety coalitions that are established with the local planning commission specifically. I'm not going to read through all these. We're going to have the slides made available, and we have all of this feedback documented. Whoops. See, there it goes again. Under representation specifically, thinking about what are the ways that we can strategically incorporate decision makers and also follow best practices of other models where, you know, having folks with technical expertise are incorporated into the process. And then also the consideration of really kind of thinking about what is the larger list of data that we have available to us. I'm gonna do that every time, I think, just double click. Okay, so some of the comments that we received between whenever the draft provisional recommendation was sent out and about 7 o'clock this morning, which they were incorporated into. We're gonna go over those right now. We have this nifty little table as in here. So maybe what I'll do is actually, I'll go over some of these and then show you what they look like in the document. So most of these I think are minor things, but they, within the context of the larger text that exists, makes more sense. So for example, the existing language, one of the headings was previously titled Planning and Development Regulation, and there was some feedback to shift that to Planning and Development Guidance, which seems to be more in alignment with the text that's underneath that. We're gonna show that back to y'all and make sure that that makes sense. Excuse me. And then you'll see project implementation, perhaps shift to support for projects. We wanted to make sure that we were defining what PDDs and MPOs are. So planning and development districts and metropolitan planning organizations. Reservoirs under page 3 was the project section, just removing reservoirs from that specific text. And there was a comment made with that it's possible that they can have a negative impact to stream channels. So we don't want to, you know, make any broad or blanket or general assumptions about that. And then we also have regional planning efforts and the development of a comprehensive strategy that's beyond political terms. And just being a little bit more explicit, that means that it extends beyond individual political terms. So I'm going to pull up the document now. Thanks y'all for bearing with us as we go through this. So what we're going to do, y'all, is track this work in real time. So we have this document where you're going to see some tracked changes. What's in red on here, those are going to be the edits that took place between when we sent the draft provisional governance recommendation and 7 o'clock this morning. So we'll kind of just scroll through these. And then there's also a couple of points which we're going to go back to in just a moment where we want to really get some discussion and feedback on. So does that sound okay? Can I get some thumbs up or head nods or a verbal okay from folks? Is that an okay process? Okay, I see one thumb. I see a head nod. Okay. Thanks, y'all. Technology is weird. I'm gonna make this a little bigger. Okay, hopefully this is good. So adding in specifically what we'll close bracket here. It's always fun to make sure that we are being consistent in our formatting. So just spelling out what PDDs are, planning and development districts and metropolitan planning organizations, NPOs. If anybody thinks that that is problematic, please come off mute or put that in the chat pod. I'm going to assume that one might be okay and that it's a helpful edit, I hope. We're going to scroll down here. Here's that second edit that was made between that time period that was aforementioned. So it's just simply changing it to a comprehensive strategy that extends beyond individual political terms. So the edit is that we are not saying that is beyond individual terms, it's saying it extends beyond individual political terms. Does anybody see any issues with this edit? No? I'm saying no. Okay. Somebody has something, put it in the chat pod or come off mute. Just let us know. The next edit is to shift planning and development, the name of that subsection, planning and development regulation, to say planning and development guidance, to be more consistent with the text that is below. Does that sound okay with people? Do we feel like that's more reflective? I'm seeing a head nod. I know some of these things are painful, y'all. Thanks for bearing with us. Somebody does see an issue with that, please put it in the chat pod. The second bullet point under planning and development guidance, which is the shift that we're recommending now, is to say provide coordination, and this should say for regional planning processes. Does anybody see any issue with that? So we're just removing guidance from that because it's repeated with the title. No. Okay. There's one flag for further discussion in here that we're going to come back to, but I want to make sure that we're going through what are I think, the simpler edits before we come back to discussion. The next part is under the subheading that says project implementation. There was a recommendation to shift that to say support for projects instead, to be more consistent with the bullet points below. Is there anybody who has thoughts on that? No? Okay. Easy enough. Promise we're going to have some more intellectually stimulating things to talk about in just a moment, y'all. Let me just double check on here. Those are two things that we're going to get through polls. Okay, so that wraps that section. That tells me that our gut was right in thinking that some of those edits might actually be clarifying and helpful. So two pieces specifically of specific feedback that we received, and we'll pull that document back up and talk about these as a group, that we wanted to talk about as a group with everybody else, is page 2 under the regional summary, under the section that now says planning and development guidance, formerly said planning and development regulation, to be able to add a reference to the fact that the region may adopt more stringent standards if justified based on regional characteristics. So we want to open that for discussion. I'm going to go back to the document where I have this recorded. And then on page 3, under data and modeling for the second bullet, just wanted to make sure that we have the understanding that the initial models are going to be base models and are not necessarily set up to evaluate future scenarios. So go back to this document and go to those two specifically mentioned items. There we go. Okay. So specifically with bullet point number 3, under planning and development guidance, formerly named planning and development regulation, it says region should not administer development standards, but the state should adopt minimum development standards based on local environmental planning and risk factors. And so this is one that we wanted to flag for further discussion, specifically kind of what I was interpreting that comment to be, and if this is an incorrect interpretation or if other people have other thoughts, is that there's kind of two things within there. So perhaps the state does adopt minimum development standards based on local environmental planning and risk factors, but also maybe this is something that's more about guidance. So being able to provide guidance to jurisdictions on ordinances to reduce flood risk. Does anybody have any thoughts? Oh, and we'll come back to Larry's comment in just a second.
Hey, this is Earl. We kind of talked about this yesterday in 6 too. And I guess my comment, and this would be from St. Charles and personally, is that, I would like to see the state set a minimum. And then I would like to see the region be able to set its own specific minimums for the region. But again, it's guidance, not specific regulations. And that certainly the parishes could stick with that minimum or go, more stringent if they needed to, or frankly, if they already.
Rachel, you have to mute as you're typing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Just muddling up Earl's point a little bit.
Sorry, let me repeat it back and we'll make sure I'm not missing anything, Earl. So what I typed very noisily was that you would like to see a minimum standard and also have the region be able to set its own specific minimum as guidance, but not as a specific regulation, and that the parishes should stick with the minimum or they can go more stringent. Is that captured correctly?
Yes, it does.
Perfect.
So the way I read that, the way I read that is if the state would set a minimum set of standards that would apply across the state, and that may not be appropriate for all regions. So it's kind of a need there for the region to be able to have its own set of minimum standards that may be more stringent. And we're kind of along the same line here. We're talking along the same line. But if I reread this and say that the state sets a minimum set of standards for each region with input from the region, that can be different. So it's not the same set of standards throughout the region. It makes sense that we wouldn't have the exact same set of standards, since we have upland hilly areas, we have flat areas, we have coastal areas, we have swamps, floodplain areas. So if the standards were set on a region-wide basis by the state, but with input from the regions and understanding those characteristics, that would be different.
Thanks, Chuck. That's helpful. Does anybody else have any thoughts or feedback to that? And then I might throw out a suggestion for recommended edits in language.
I am seeing two comments in the chat, Rachel, relevant to that. I'm seeing one from Ren. It says, if the minimum is not a regulation, couldn't it be ignored? Thank you, Ren. And I'm seeing one from Larry Bankston. It says, a state standard of what? Minimum elevation? And those are questions. Is it a state standard? What is that of? So thank you, Ren and Larry.
Yeah, thanks, Evelyn, for having my back there. Go ahead.
I think we're talking about development standards, right?
I mean, I think, Evelyn, do you want to speak a little bit more to that on the state side?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so one thing that I do want to make sure to just remind us all as we're talking about this is, you know, this recommendation is an initial trajectory. So it's not necessarily going to have a detailed policy standard within the body of this text, first of all. So just off the bat, let's make sure we all understand that, because this is really setting the tone for what the coalition may decide to do or decide not to do, right? And so part of this is also this group weighing in on what they potentially see as the divisions between like the role of what the state could help, right? If we're saying that we think that there are some approaches to development that may make sense statewide, that can be a consensus that I'm seeing coming through here. But then specifically saying exactly what that standard is or should be, I think isn't necessary to get through this step of the work, right? And so that's where I'm hearing a few questions come through. I think the important point is, you know, one thing that I've heard as a recurring comment is we know that there are ways that we can improve, and we want to take that on together so that we're somewhat of a unified front. And so I'm hearing that one approach is to have sort of a statewide approach to development standards. And then another approach that I'm hearing some of y'all highlight is we don't want that to limit our ability for the region or the parish or the municipality to have their own higher standards that make people even more safe from flooding. So is that kind of summarizing what we're hearing? I think that the language suggestions seem to be focused around those areas.
I want to say that, you know, when you say standard, it's like motherhood again. I said that word many times. Standard of what? Like Larry says. Somebody needs to make bullets of what are the things that needs to be general standards that can be imposed by the state. Are we talking about land use? Are we talking about minimum elevations? But there are so many issues when you say standards. Building standards, how you build, is so many interrelated issues. Somebody needs to kind of lay this out really, and then say, look, the standards that the state potentially could do are this and this and this and this and this, so that we know what we're talking about. Because we are talking in too much generalities. If you send this to the state, they're going to, the elected official, first question they're going to ask you, what do you mean by standards? You say it's too general.
I think that's a good point, Dietmar. I guess what I'm saying is you're not proposing, for example, a bill within this document, right? You're proposing an approach. So if the coalition is going to pursue a concept of having development standards either within the state or within the region, this is just your opportunity to signal that you want the coalition to pursue that. You see what I'm saying? So you don't necessarily have to, you know, say this is exactly what that standard is. You may pursue it and find that it's not something you want to continue pursuing, right? And revisit that approach.
Hi, this is Bridget Bailey. I actually just put it in the comments box as well, but I just wanted to bring up some of the discussion back and forth. For bullet 3 is maybe the statement could be or should be, and I typed it out, I think Rachel captured it. It should be, region will provide recommended development standards based on local environmental risk factors, meaning we could, as a regional group, based off of what Chuck said earlier, our own environmental issues or concerns, you know, depending on what the region looks like, what we are suggesting that local you know, entities, municipalities, governing bodies could embrace as suggested language that we know would be impactful for the region of the state that we have the issues with certain environmental concerns. I don't know that it needs to be prescriptive and dictated. And I agree that yes, there needs to be something that's collectively at the state level. So it's, you have wetlands in one part of the parish, or one part of the state, it's going to be the same standard for what other, you know, another section or region of the state. Again, that gives you that continuity, but I don't want us to miss the boat by the regional group being able to come up with what we feel for our area of the state could be suggested best practices, if you will, for development standards to be embraced by those agencies and organizations that have the authority to adopt the laws or the regulations.
Hey,
Yeah,
this
thanks,
is
Bridget,
I
and that-
absolutely agree.
Yeah, I agree with what Bridget was saying there. That's kind of coming at it from the other direction that I did. It's really the same thing in that it might be represented at the state level, but it's coming from the regions. The origin is from the regions. It's not the state dictating to the regions.
So I'm wondering in terms of recommended language, and there's some comments in the chat pod that I want to get to before we transition from this conversation. We got a lot of ground to cover, y'all. Recommended language, Bridget, what you propose in the chat pod as a bullet point is region will provide recommended development standards based on local environmental risk factors. And then what I'm also hearing within that is having a bullet point that speaks to state minimum standards that can be informed by the regions. Am I hearing that correctly? Does that sound like it lands okay with everybody?
Yeah, that sounds fine to me.
Is Earl, I like it.
Okay, perfect. Well, we will work to fix that language super quickly on the back end here. Is there anybody who disagrees with that? I want to pull that up, or is that language a deal breaker for anybody?
I would just ask the question, this is Becky. If you have to go back to the elected officials in your city, parish, or whomever, and explain to them that you signed off on this, as a representative on this panel. Are you comfortable with that? Because that they have to answer to the people in whatever jurisdiction it is that you're representing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very proud.
That's the question that I think it needs to be asked. Do they understand what you're agreeing to? And are you comfortable telling them that you agreed to it on their behalf?
Yeah, and let's all remember the key word in this particular milestone that we're at right now, it's provisional. So this is a milestone that we have to meet as per the state, and we are kind of giving them the roadmap at this particular, intersection, and we have an opportunity to change it moving forward. This is a first step, and yeah, I would be very comfortable speaking to the parish president about what we did here today. In fact, I'd be very proud of it.
I agree with you, Ross.
I also think if you look back at the timeline, then the next phase is to the public outreach, which includes going to parish officials.
I mean, Becky's right that, we have to answer to other people for the decisions of this group. That's why we were each one of us was appointed to this group.
This is Earl. I think at least my folks expected there to be some sort of guidance coming out of here. There's a little bit of a dangle of some money available, and at least I assume there would be some regulatory provisions at least to make sure you met some minimums.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. That's really helpful. I have some suggested language, and for full transparency within the process, what I'm doing is I'm trying to incorporate this into the comments. I'm going to take a moment to stop sharing before we transition into the next section after this, to send that over to Kim Marisak, who's going to incorporate it into the slides so we can present the information back to y'all ahead of the vote. So just for transparency there, I want to go back to a couple of the comments in the chat pod just to go through these. Larry, project implementation is too broad. Review and provide technical assistance. The word review implies a subject to approval. Let's see, I'm going to copy and paste that down here and see if we can get through that specifically. Because I think, the reason why we shifted to support for projects is that what we haven't been hearing is that it would be a technical, like a formalized review process for permitting, for example. I think what we've been hearing from this group is that we would like to say if this is consistent or inconsistent with the activities of the region. I might be wrong in that misunderstanding. I think the minimum, not a regulation, could be ignored. I think Evelyn addressed that. Also, the next comment. I think we've addressed the one about differing development standards. We captured that. Gary, doesn't everyone who participates in an FIP have to meet minimum development standards? I think yes, and also specific to the community rating system, if you want to be ranked higher than a CRF 8, then you have to have at least a FLOTA-free board minimum. So it's another example. Comment by Becky, is this going to be taken to the legislature in any form to memorialize and formalize this body? And if so, does everybody here realize that they're signing off on decisions? I think we covered that as well. Just as a reminder, this is a provisional document, and our next step is to get feedback, specifically from elected officials as well as other folks. Question is whether we can have standards that would be the same for the 7 HUCs being the same. The question is whether we can have standards would be the same for the 7 HUCs being the same. I think that also kind of depends, because a lot of the land use planning and regulation development authority is at the local jurisdictional level, and many of our parishes are in multiple HUCs. So I don't know that makes as much sense.
I may be able to.
I would.
Oh, go ahead.
Kind of,
I feel like I'm cutting somebody off. Who's speaking?
To kind of respond to Larry's question in the chat box, that some of these HUCs the watershed is not, the HUC not define ecological homogeneousness, I guess. So the watershed changes within those HUCs. So again, you're going to have those upland areas with a lot of slope. You're going to have flat areas all within the same HUC. So it could be that the recommended standards is not one standard. It's a set of standards for different conditions.
Thanks, Chuck. That's a really helpful point to consider.
This is extremely difficult to do. I think. I think it's a great idea, but it's extremely difficult to do. I never seen it done that way. And so, because then you will have different standards, and you know how that is. Some parishes will say, well, why, why do we have to do this and they don't have to do that? Now, if this comes and emanates from the local government, it's a completely different story. It has to emanate from the local government. That's another thing is, coming from the state down, the local governments are going to say, my feeling is they're going to say, no, hold a minute, although there might be minimum standards. But the evolution, the evolution of the process has to start at the local level. It's my opinion.
I think that's what we're leaning towards.
Thanks, Dietmar. Thanks, Chuck. Just acknowledgement that it's going to be challenging, and that's going to be a barrier that we're going to have to manage, and make sure that we're getting really good feedback when we do have the opportunity to get really valuable time from our local jurisdictions. We know that they wear many hats. So I think for the next part of specific feedback, y'all, this is specifically under the data and modeling subsection, and it kind of runs over just barely onto page 4, and it's bullet point number 2. So this says use data and modeling for the purpose of project evaluation, scenario planning, and plan updates. And the comment that we got back, which I think is a really good reminder for us, was that, as the models are going to be developed in their, in their initial form, they're just going to be base models. So we're going to have to do some work to be able to develop decision-making tools and frameworks around those, as well as adding additional layers of data and information. And so one thing I wanted to consider here is that maybe we switch this language to over time. Data and models will be used for the purpose of project evaluation, scenario planning, and plan updates, just so that we're acknowledging that what we're going to get initially might not be able to do that. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that. I'm going to go on mute for a moment.
I think you're on the right trajectory.
Does anybody think that we shouldn't change the language? Okay. Well, I'm not hearing anything, so let me check the chat box. Sorry,
the comment I want to make is, again, when you're talking about modeling, are you talking about a regional model? Are you talking, because we got in the Emmett River Basin, for example, we got several watersheds between there, other watersheds, Jones Creek, several here in Baton Rouge and Livingston Parish. So when you say the modeling watersheds you have to develop a very sophisticated, if you're talking about regional model, it has to be very sophisticated to even address some of these issues we're talking about. Typically in development, when the developer goes out there and develops a subdivision, they do modeling. Like in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, they have to do, so they require some modeling to do a subdivision or a development. But guess what? It's based on the 10, 15, maybe 25-year flood. It is a guide, it's a standard already there. And so How do you get to do a regional model to provide you that? That is a difficult, it's not an easy thing. It's going to be very hard. I just bring it to the attention that, you know, all models are not the same.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think that's a really good point. And I wonder if we can add in here, over time, data and models will be used for the purpose of project evaluation, scenario planning, and plan updates at the appropriate decision-making level. What I'm hearing is it's not a one size fit all. And there are some comments in the chat pod. So thank you, Ren, saying, free technical advice from jurisdictions is really helpful. It might not translate into regulatory efforts, but that it's helpful. Rami, I think I'm saying that correctly. Agree with minimum standards might be different situations, but there could be a few basic sets of guidelines at the state level that local bodies could pick up and mix. Data has to be accurate. Also, the comment to financial means. So let me see. We have quite a bit more to cover in here. One thing that I wanted to bring up really quickly, based on a comment from Larry earlier, is that the project implementation section, which is now called support for projects, is too broad. The word review implies subject to approval. I don't think that's our intention here. I might be misguided in that, but I think really what this group wants to do is think about what is consistent or inconsistent with regional activities. Does anybody think we should shift this language? And if so, what should we shift it to?
Leave it as review.
Other thoughts, maybe going down the list here, maybe from Devin or Steve or Gary or Alex or Bobby Joe.
I thought of leaving it as review.
I'm good with
okay.
Backing up.
I agree with review.
Okay, y'all. With that being, I'm hearing a lot of folks saying just leave it. A couple of things coming in now. Review for comment and suggestion. We want to add this, review for comment and suggestion, and or provide. Is that an okay addition?
I mean, at this time, I think the broadness gives us more leeway to massage this into the future. Getting too specific kind of, handcuffs us a little bit. Again, this is just the first step and we have time to work out the fine details. That's just my opinion.
Right. Okay, well, we will, for the sake of time, y'all, is it okay if we move on from this and into the next two parts? I'm already gonna have to pull some time from the agenda, squirrel around with some stuff to make sure we got time to get through today. Yeah. Okay, I'm seeing some head nods. All right, so there's other two big sections in here. We have a section on the agenda that's called Moving Forward that has about 30 minutes dedicated to it. I think we're going to eat pretty far into that, so we will not get through a lot of that content today, but that is okay. We can get to it next time. I'm going to toss this back over to Evelyn. Specifically, within the provisional governance recommendation, there are two particular sections that are with regards to the chartering of this entity or organization. So I'm going to toss this over to Evelyn, and then Dr. Thomas South is going to provide some context as well.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, so zooming kind of out a little bit from, we've been very focused, I think, on what exactly is the work that the future body is going to be doing. Now we're asking more about what are the kind of logistics, the nuts and bolts of how they're going to actually be enabled. And so it's more of a process question. And so we asked this last time, we just pulled out the two answers to that poll that had the most responses in favor of those two things. And so the question before you now is, and we actually have a poll, but I'm not going to launch that yet. We're going to kind of get through a little bit of initial content here. But so the question now is, how should the body be chartered, right? And so your options are legislatively via a state commission, board, or agency, or chartered locally in accordance with a state charter. And so I thought that the document that Rachel sent out really did explain this very well. And I want to kind of just run through what it says. So it gave a little bit of context. To me, you know, the main distinction between these two options are who is the coalition working through, right? And so I think you have some examples here, Rachel, in the document, maybe on the slides too, that kind of help explain this. So one example is like a levee or a drainage board, right? That's kind of an example of A, right? So they're working through a state agency to get their work done in some cases, right? They're still a body empowered and, you know, they work, you know, without a lot of supervision, right? But they do work in a construct of they're reporting to an agency in some respects. And then on the other side of that, when you look at option two, a good example of that is the planning and development districts, the PDDs. So the state legislation just says, you know, they can exist basically, but then it requires some degree of opting in via local ordinance to actually build that body in a way that it can act on certain things and to build out that purview. And so that's the question before you, you know, does this board need to have kind of an intermediary where the state is helping them get things done and that they're coordinating with an agency, or is this board kind of on your own, but still, you know, enabled by the legislation that allows it to form and act?
Yeah, and, you know, and I would just, you know, I was looking at, we were trying to synthesize whether we could make some clear definitions, and, you know, governance is messy. And, you know, I'd like to emphasize that all of these are bodies that work under a democratic system. So the legislature of Louisiana is elected by the people of Louisiana. The governor of Louisiana, which was elected by the people of Louisiana, and all of our local officials are, you know, elected by citizens of those parishes and councils. And the question is, how do you set up the right representative structure for the problem set within a larger, complicated system? And it can vary. So with MPOs and with development districts, there's a lot of things that have to do with local land use. There's buy-in about infrastructure, but there's also a federal program that provides incentives for participating in those systems. And so membership is heavily incentivized that way. But you do have a local component. Now you can set up a state board or a state commission with local appointees, but you can set it up to cover an entire area if you want to make sure you have everybody participating. And those are just decisions and trade-offs that you have to make as representatives here on this board. And those are some of the main differences. And it's a balance of equities, and it's a balance of your judgment. I don't think anybody from our group wants to at all push you or balance you in any way, you know, and I particularly don't know, but I just think those are some of the policy considerations you might want to make in terms of what you ask for.
That's a great point.
Oh, Evelyn, you're talking, but we can't hear you. I'm not sure if it's on mute or. Hey, Evelyn.
I'm sorry, y'all, my audio got cut off. Are we good? Okay, I see y'all nodding heads. As
I
we
can
said
hear
at the
you,
beginning
yes.
of all of this, you know, we do want to make sure that the good work that you're setting out to do continues beyond a single funding stream. And I think that this question is especially relevant to that, right? If you have a board, for example, that, requires local ordinances from each of the municipalities that is represented, and then people kind of maybe drop off or aren't interested or, don't necessarily have the commitment long-term, then you're going to potentially struggle with retention of that membership or retention of participation. And so it's definitely something to think about in this question.
On the flip side of
And I
that,
want to,
going to make you maintain engagement with people as people transition in and out of those different areas, and that's incentivizing that engagement.
can y'all
Okay.
hear me?
We can right now.
I mean, I think.
All right, I was having an audio issue.
I
Please
think
go.
the decision you make, they all have trade-offs. Like you say, that there's accountability issue with local government, which are extremely important and should not be discounted. And that's a totally valid concern. There's also potentially concerns about larger regional coverage, and that's also a valid concern. And those are decisions that you, as a group, I guess it's sort of at the core of what you've been tasked with by that. And maybe it's a hard choice, but I think that, just understanding that you're able to make that recommendation now at this point.
Okay, so I have a question. Through this process, each watershed is looking at forming its own entity, whatever that may be. But correct me if I am wrong, the state is also going through the same process to create a statewide entity, correct?
I'm going to open that up to you, Evelyn.
Earl, I want to make sure I'm understanding your question. Is the question if the state is creating an entity to kind of work with all the regions?
Yeah. Aren't they going through the same process sort of as we are?
Gotcha. I mean, I think there are definitely some critical questions, some of which are prompted by like the process that the council has gone through and the tags and in the formation of the operational guidance that definitely, get to the heart of what you're saying, which is we want to make sure that whatever framework we end up with, and this goes for the regions and the state, that, there is like a clear designation of how, for example, Region 7 is going to give their input, feedback, and even, requests and direction to a state entity, right? So I think you're right that, some of what this conversation prompts is for the regions to say, for example, some regions have said, we do want to work with the state agency. Like we see an important role in the work that we're doing can't be done like in a silo, right? Just by the region. We have to have some counterpart on the state side. And I think that's a valuable piece of input.
So are you saying, yes, they are creating a state agency that's running parallel with each of these individual regions?
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that right now we have, for example, state agencies that interact with the regions, which is actually what we're doing right now, right? I work for OCD, some of us work for other agencies. And so what I'm hearing from the regions is that at least some of them are requesting to maintain a relationship where they have an agency that they're working on watershed planning with. So it doesn't mean a new agency. It's just what we're doing right now is an example of what they're requesting.
So was that your question, Earl? Brand new?
Well, yeah, it is. I was kind of under the impression that there was, and we discussed this in 6, I guess, is that there was meetings between the agencies who do watershed work now to form, I don't want to say a coalition, but to form an agency or not even a new agency, but a new coordination group so that, we can stop all the redundancies. I thought that was the part of the plan. And my point was that there if they're doing that and that new group, whatever you want to call it, exists, then I was under the impression that we would all work as one entity, and that's the group that sort of the regions would be reporting to, or maybe even participating in.
Are you talking about like an association? Is that what you're talking about? An association, like you will have an association of all of the watersheds in Region 7, which would be 7 watersheds. So we will have an association of those 7 watersheds?
Well, that's kind of what the question I was asking is about whether or not there was going to be an overarching organization, because I thought there was.
It sounds like, yeah, like
Can I,
talking about an association of all of the HUC regions. And the
so I
agencies.
think, hang on a,
I'm just trying to understand, and the existing agencies that already do watershed work.
Well, there is a watershed council, and maybe Evelyn, you can remind the group that this initiative came out of that as a multi-agency effort with.
Yeah, I mean, Earl, I'm not quite following what you're describing, but the Watershed Council exists. I mean, that's part of, what we're working within is the executive order did establish the Watershed Council, but that doesn't sound like what you're describing, so.
Yeah, actually, that's exactly what I was talking about. I just didn't have a name for it.
Oh, well, good.
And that, because we're talking about the 2 forms of governance, about answering to a specific agency or kind of operating on your own. And I guess I was picturing answering to the Watershed Council as as a point of authority, I guess you would say.
I'm following you now. Thank you so much, Earl, for clarifying. I was making a confused face. I was having trouble following, but yeah, I mean, you're right, Earl. The council does exist. It is comprised of 5 agencies. In that respect, yeah, I mean, we are working within a context of a state, watershed council. Agencies staff it. The regions are also forming, a potential governance structure. So yeah, gotcha.
and thanks, Shell. I think that was a really helpful, getting to the root of that and saying, okay, it actually is the Watershed Council, I think was really helpful. The state's also going through their process for an organizational framework as well. So they're really thinking about this stuff at the same time that we are, and our efforts informing theirs. One thing that I do want to provide a reminder with is if you are not on the regional steering committee, please stay on mute until the public comment section. You can put any of your comments or anything in the chat pod throughout, and we'll get to those. So I think another thing that came up, what are other regions suggesting? Evelyn, correct me if I'm wrong, and then I think this is the last thing that we want to address before we get this poll rolling. I think what I've been hearing from the other regions based on what they just presented today, earlier in this discussion, specifically regions 5, 7, or 5, 6, and 8, is that they're thinking about, what is this like legislatively chartered via state commission? Evelyn, I don't know if that's reflective of what you've seen.
I think that's correct. That tracks with a lot of the feedback that I've heard as well. I don't have every single recommendation right in front of me, but yeah, I do see that showing up in many of them.
I have one last question, and that is, how is the charter, whatever this is going to look like, charter they're going to come up in Region 7, how do you will consider the Amite River Basin Commission, the Amite River Basin? We are established by state legislation. We got statutes creating this agency with responsibilities, et cetera, even funding sources. How will fit that into the charter?
I think that's a great question, Dietmar, and I think that other folks who represent local jurisdictions might have the same one. And the answer that I have, which is not supremely satisfying, is that, this is a provisional governance recommendation. So moving on from here on out, we're going to figure that out together. That's something that might specifically be, in a more robust version of this recommendation. It might potentially be also within the bylaws and other things as well. So I think other folks are thinking about that, and we're working towards being specific about that. So if it's okay, we've got about 24 minutes and we have quite a bit to get through, y'all. We're going to throw this Zoom poll up and see what people are thinking. And as a reminder, we would like to invite only the regional steering committee members to vote on this. So there are only about up to 34 people. That is including the steering committee primary member as well as their alternates. We've noticed that on the back end, some people who are not regional steering committee members have been answering these polls, which is okay, but we don't want people who are not steering committee members to necessarily skew these particular decisions. And when I say decision, I mean very preliminary considerations. Decision is much too strong of a word. Evelyn, we had another item come up in the chat bot. I think it might be better for you to answer, perhaps. When is this being taken to the legislature? And we'll, as you answer that, we'll give people just a couple more minutes.
Sure. No, that's a great question. I mean, just to clarify, what we're working on now, the document that we're looking at is just a provisional recommendation. It's actually not like a bill or anything that would go before the legislature. But if, you know, this region, among others, decides to pursue a track where they would need state legislation to enable their coalition, which is possible, and maybe even likely, right? So I don't want to sound like that's not going to happen. So if we're headed in that direction, then the eventual outcome may potentially be within the 2022 session, because 2021 is like right now, right? That's about to happen in just a few months. So I think we're going to need a little bit more time to, like, you know, like Rachel's saying, bylaws, plan out the full trajectory of the group and what their scope is going to be. But you could potentially see that manifesting in the 2022 session.
Thanks, Evelyn. So it looks like 67%, so 10 out of 15 said legislatively via a state commission, board, or agency. So if it's okay, I think that we might include this in the summary slides and then also within the provisional recommendation document for today that we'll be voting on. Okay. Oh, I have to stop sharing. There we go. And there's a secondary part to this as well, y'all. So we also have this question about how consistent are the charters across the region. So I'm going to pause here, let Evelyn and Tom pick it up for us to have more context around.
Thanks. Yeah, so I want to make sure that we, sorry, I saw a comment that confused me in the chat. It said we're going to close the meeting in 10 seconds. Not the meeting, just the poll. The poll is closed. I think that's what we were referring to. So yeah, everybody stay on the line. Moving on. How consistent should the regions be in their charters? So I think Pat from South Central kind of spoke to this a little bit for the purpose of Region 6. You know, some regions have said pretty clearly that they want a framework, at least, not rules that are the same for everybody, but they want a framework at least where these coalitions are enabled together. I think that's an important kind of point of unity for some regions. And so that's definitely a piece of feedback that we've heard. That's what is implied in A. So that would be a single charter that just empowers, you know, all of them at the same time, right? And that kind of speaks to that buffet approach when we talk about, you know, if we're all enabled by the same bill, it may say that you have authority X, Y, Z, and you still may start out as a coalition or a body and say, look, we want to define our scope like really closely. It's within our authorities. We're not surpassing our authorities, but we're not going to do everything under the sun either, you know, which seems reasonable. Option B is really more of each coalition is kind of their own piece of business, right? And so they would each be independently chartered.
Tom, I don't know if you have some more context to add here that might be helpful for folks to consider. Oh, and you're on mute.
I think I really thought each region's presentation today was very thoughtful, and you could see how everybody had gone through, had been very convincing logic for their own context, and there are benefits of doing things uniformly. There's less possibility for arbitrage, there's less possibility for inconsistency, but as we see in the difference of the New Orleans region versus Acadiana, there are different issues that they're dealing with, different existing institutions, different compromises and strategies that they want to take. And so the question is, how do you bundle some of the bigger challenges that there's sort of larger consensus around, or around hazards and flooding, and the need to manage them in some new and innovative ways? And do you balance that better through one enabling package, or you do it better with the regions asking for, say, look, New Orleans is different, charter us completely independently and separately from or South Central or Acadiana. And I think that's sort of the balancing question that's there from a policy perspective. And again, like with everything, there are valid views on either of the two strategies, and it's really, you're the experts on answering that question for your region.
Thanks, Tom and Evelyn. And I think we'll take just a couple of minutes if anybody has questions here.
Hey, this is Earl. Not a question, but a comment. I know at least in 6 and partially in 8, the context about the idea about wanting to do it all on their one authorizing legislation came from a lot of us who are in split jurisdictions or split between watersheds. It just makes dealing with the charter a little easier if it's all together, so that at least the authorizing legislation is the same.
That's really helpful context. John Clark or Devin Foyle, I know y'all share, you're across multiple regions as well. Is that do y'all have anything to say along with that?
Sounds good.
Yeah, I have nothing to add.
Thanks, y'all. Are there any other comments or questions on this one? And if not, we'll move forward with a poll. Okay, I'm not hearing anything. What you notice on the slide is that there's text that's in bold. One of the funny things that we learned about Zoom is that the poll has a character limit. So you're going to see the items in bold that are related to item A and B that are specifically listed. And that's simply because we couldn't put all of the text because it maxed out the character limit. So thanks for y'all's understanding. Again, we ask that only the steering committee members state their response on this poll if possible. Hey, thanks, Larry, for that question in the chat pod. We should have no more than 16. There are 16 total regional steering committee members. Some of those are alternates. And I think we might be at a good point. We'll give you all about 10 more seconds if you have more. If we want to get the 2 more who maybe haven't had the chance to put that on here. And I do want to say that this is not the same thing as a technical vote. Right? This is just a poll to get an understanding of where y'all are at for the purpose of being able to further fill out the governance recommendation, the provisional recommendation. Thanks, Evelyn. So it looks like within that document, we will probably go with, we'll go with option 1, which is that they are authorized by a single charter. Okay. Okay, we'll go on to the next section where we're essentially just going to wrap up what we've heard so far, reflect the changes that have been made. So we're presenting the information back to the group, specifically so that the regional steering committee can go through the voting process. So under the section that has the summary within the provisional governance recommendation, you don't see this text specifically in there, but we're saying, you know, we want to get to a point where there's a Region 7 collaborative and we're bringing together actors across the region working towards a shared vision. So these are some of the ways that we might anticipate doing that. So you'll see planning and development guidance. So we do have that change reflected here. That looks like, for example, providing technical assistance to local entities who create floodplain management plans, provide coordination.
Rachel, I just noticed I missed a slide in the update, so you might want to go to the next one. I updated the text in the next slide. I don't think I got it all in this one. There was like 4
thanks,
slides.
Tim.
My apologies.
No, thank you. Your efforts are much appreciated. Let's see, so provide technical assistance to local entities who create floodplain management plans, provide guidance and coordination for regional planning processes. The region should not hang on a second, this one's not, hang on, y'all, that one's not updated either. So why don't we do this instead?
They're updated on my
Hold,
slide.
please.
Do you want me to share my screen maybe? That's
Yeah, I
weird.
will stop sharing. Yeah, probably something funky with Google Slides. You go ahead and share, Kim.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're good.
Sorry for the
And
technology
feel free to
switch. Can you see? Can you
run us
see my
through 'em if
screen?
you could.
Uh,
I can.
okay.
Go ahead and present them if you're comfortable.
No, you can go ahead. I'll just run the slide deck.
Okay. Thanks, Kim. Much appreciated. So planning and development guidance, you know, the first bullet point, we've got that one. That one did not change. The second, state should adopt minimum development standards based on the local environmental risk factors. So that's the shift in language that we heard. The region will provide recommended development standards based on, recommended is the key word there, recommended development standards based on local environmental risk factors. And the region should provide technical assistance to local entities regarding the impact of development standards. Then we go down to outreach and engagement. So these did not shift. These are the same. We didn't receive feedback. And there's 2 bullet points. The first is to provide opportunities for watershed-related outreach and education. And the second is long-term capacity building from the region to public entities and citizens. We'll go next to data and modeling, I think. So models should initially be housed at the state level. Over time, with support, capacity should be built at the regional level. We do see a small change in the language that's under the intended goals, which were reflected in the guiding principles framework, where we're really saying that over time, we would like to use these as tools for the development of scenarios. You don't see that level of detail on this slide specifically, but we'll pull that up right before the vote. Next. Project implementation, I think we're changing project implementation to support for projects. So that bucket will read support for projects, review and or provide technical assistance on major projects as deemed appropriate by the future bylaws of the Region 7 watershed body. Thanks, Cam. All right, and then let's see next. These are within the provisional governance recommendation as well. The authorities, that are laid out. So to review and or provide technical assistance for regional projects. Once again, these are broad. Cooperate or contract with other governmental agencies, authority to oversee regional planning processes, provide support for technical assistance related to outreach and engagement efforts and education efforts and train the trainer programs, and to receive, manage, and distribute funds from governmental, private, or nonprofit sources, including authority to set policy on how they are distributed. So the next section, which is the roadmap section, the only two items that have changed on this at all are the top 2 bullet points in the how section. So specifically, based on the polls that we just went through, what we saw is that the majority of folks thought that the Region 7 watershed body should be chartered via a state commission, board, or agency, and that all watershed bodies across the state, we'll have to change that language there, all watershed bodies across the state should be authorized by a single charter. Other things within that, those are the 2 things that changed. In terms of the who, CRPC, Capital Region Planning Commission, should facilitate meetings of the Region 7 watershed body and perform administrative functions related to the work of the coalition. The Region 7 watershed body should be composed of a mix of technical experts, elected officials or their appointees, and citizens/organizations outside of government entities who represent them. The Region 7 watershed body should have oversight by state agency. Moving into what? The Region 7 watershed body may have subcommittees or working groups relevant to focus areas. The relevant or the regional watershed boundaries should remain as is and be recognized, approved by state agency board program. And there's slashes between those. And then under how, the other 3 bullet points are the Region 7 watershed body should have the ability to obtain external funding and maintain local stable funding. The state should lead the effort to draft the legal elements that reflect these recommendations. Once they are refined, there's that entire outreach period, remember? And the state should adopt minimum development standards, once again, with the understanding that there's that local context as well, the local environmental risk factors.
I'm gonna
So
stop
let me
sharing
see, I
so
wonder,
you
Kim.
can- I'm gonna stop sharing so you can take it back.
We had the exact same thought. Okay, y'all. So what we're gonna do in the nick of time, I am like sweating over here with how much time we have remaining. But this is good, it's a good kind of sweat. Is we're gonna move into the voting section specifically for the provisional governance recommendation. So to adopt the provisional governance recommendation, we are going to ask primary regional steering committee members or their designated alternates. So when we did roll call earlier and asked who would be voting, that's who we expect to vote, unless they, you know, for example, somebody fell off and then their alternate came on. We want to ensure that we only have 1 vote per affiliation. If you are having difficulties with the instructions that we're going to provide, then you can also choose to vote yay or nay in the chat pod. As a reminder, abstaining is not an option today. And this is provisional. So it's a milestone on our larger roadmap. And we're not done with the work. So there's going to be some extensive outreach and engagement to get more feedback. And there will be more opportunities after today. So it's not an end all be all. So in terms of the instructions, I'm going to ask Kim and Evelyn to help me out a little bit. So as a reminder, only 1 steering committee member per affiliation can vote. That designated voting regional steering committee member is going to receive a Google Forms link to vote in real time. We're going to send that via direct message in your chat pod on Zoom. We know that's not going to work for folks on the phone. We have you covered, don't worry. That voting form looks like this. So very simply, you'll put your name, how you vote on the motion. We're going to have Ross make that motion, so please hold on that. And then we're going to show the responses to everybody so that we, you know, not necessarily with name, but, you know, what's the majority, yay or nay. We're going to walk through the voting instructions based on what platform you're using in just a second. If you're on the phone and you are not using the Zoom application, we'll ask you to do a verbal vote. So I think John Clark, perhaps, and we'll hold on that. So don't come off mute quite yet. And then Major Coleman, perhaps. And if you're having challenges accessing the direct message, you can put your answer in the chat pod or do a voice vote as well. So we want to leave that option open. So just to make sure that folks know exactly where to find this information once it's sent to them, if you're on the computer, this is what you're going to see. So you have a little toolbar that's usually in the bottom part of your screen. You might have a chat bubble. Click on that chat bubble. You're going to be sent a direct message from either Kim Marusek or Evelyn Campo. Click on that link and then fill it out and hit submit. If you are on the phone and you're using Zoom, specifically, you will go to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, click more, click chat, and that's where you will find that link. Kim and Evelyn, if y'all want to go ahead and send those out, I think that would be great. And then if you are on a tablet, specifically an iPad, I'm not sure about what it looks like on other platforms. In the upper right-hand corner, you will receive a direct message chat. And so you would fill the form out via there. Okay. So Kim and Evelyn, can y'all come off mute and let me know if you've sent that over?
Yep, I've sent to 5 steering committee members.
So Rachel and Kim, just so y'all know, for the link that came to me, I wasn't able to, well, now that I'm saying that, of course it worked. At first, the link didn't work, so I copied and pasted into the browser, and then that way, just in case somebody else it didn't work, that's just another way they can copy and paste it into whatever web browser. But then when I was trying the second time, it worked from the direct message. So there you
Thanks,
go.
Russ. And I realized we never did the formal motion. So pause. We need the motion. I'm sorry, y'all. That's my fault.
Here we go. I'll make a motion to adopt Region 7's provisional governance recommendation with the understanding that the results of today's meeting with regard to the chartering of the watershed body in consistency with other regional watershed bodies is reflected.
I'll second.
I'll second that.
Second from Chuck. Was that Chuck?
Second. Second.
All right, got it. Still was wondering if it was Chuck, but I think it was you.
Multiple people.
Right.
Y'all are ready. What I'm going to do, y'all, is ask John Clark, if you are ready, do you vote yay or nay to that motion? Can you come off mute? And if we need to repeat it, please let us know.
Yeah. I'll vote yay.
I heard yay. All right, thank you, John. I'm going to go ahead and record that.
Rachel, I think Major Coleman is also on the phone. Unless he's dropped off.
You still with us, Major?
Now, was I supposed to receive a link?
Yes, sir. You should have. Whoops. Evelyn or Kim, can one of y'all please send that over to Chuck while I work on
I will
a
send
little
it
bit
right
of
now.
QAQC? Thank
Yep,
you.
Sending it now
How was it coming to me?
through the chat.
Okay.
I see Major on the line.
We still have you, Major. And if you're on your phone, you might need to press *6. Okay, let me see. I've got votes from Ross, Bridget, Earl, Devin, Michael, Bobby Joe, Steve, Gary, John, and Karen. That is 10 folks. I think we're missing from Major Coleman. And then who else are we missing from team?
I just sent the link to Major Coleman. Sorry about that, Major. I thought you were going to be on your phone. So if you are not.
I'm still on the phone, but I was supposed to get out the computer, but something came up and I stayed on. So.
Oh, okay. Well, you should have it now in your chat pod.
And if it's helpful too, Major, you can come off mute and vote yay or nay to the motion. It's also an option.
Okay, I vote yes.
Okay, let me record that really quickly. Hold. Okay, I have 13 votes, and I think that's right. If I'm counting correctly, I might need somebody on the team to help me count correctly on the roll call sheet, but I think that is all that we have. So I'm going to
Wait a minute.
share my screen.
Can you hear me? Dietmar?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can I vote? Can I vote by voice? Can I vote by voice?
Yeah, I think we were missing one vote. We were missing one
Okay,
vote.
my vote is nay. I don't know what's going on with my computer, but it's flipping back and forth, up and down, right and left. So my vote is nay.
Thanks, Dietmar. I will record that right now, and then I will reshare this.
By my count, you should have 14.
14. Thank you, Cam.
I am seeing also a request to just repeat the motion. Ross, I don't want to misstate you, but it was, I'll let you go ahead and repeat that.
Yeah, I did it kind of fast because we missed it. So I'll make a motion to adopt Region 7's provisional governance recommendation with the understanding that the results of today's meeting with regards to the chartering of the watershed body and consistency with other regional watershed bodies is reflected. I can add that to the chat box if you'd like.
Perfect. So here are the results from that. We have 12 yay and 2 nay. So it looks like, I think, Ross, I'm supposed to let you say that part, that it passes.
Rachel, was that? I'm sorry.
So I think we had 12 yay and 2 nay.
Motion passes. I'm
Perfect.
double tasking. I'm getting that motion into the chat.
Thanks, Ross. Okay. So wanted to say congrats, y'all. 12 to 2 votes that did pass. So we actually are going to skip this entire moving forward section and open it up to public comments and the request for feedback, because we are just about out of time, y'all. So we want to open it up. If you are, if you would like to make a public comment at this moment in time, we ask that you come off mute on your microphone, or you can use the chat pod. We'll also have one more item, and we have a request for feedback. So we would love for you to provide us with what are referred to as pluses, things that you liked about today, and deltas, things that you would like to offer to help us improve on this board or in the chat pod. I'm going to share that in the chat pod, but do we have any public comments for today? Okay, not hearing any, and I'm not seeing any.
I will say this is not an easy process. You really got to work through this, and y'all are doing a great job at it. Takes dedication.
Yeah, I agree. And I believe we had 2 or 3 nay votes, Dietmar, being one of them. And whatever we can do to get you on as a yes moving forward, we can get together, we can talk, whatever we can do to make you more comfortable with your commission that's already, chartered. We have time and we have the ability to work together to find a solution. And, look, let's make this full consensus. So if you want to have a call offline, or anybody who voted nay, let's do it. Let's work together and let's come up with a solution. So I'm just putting it out there and offering, that path forward. So
I appreciate.
So I will echo a lot of what
fact.
I will echo a lot of what Ross and others have said. And I said, if we look good, it's because of Rachel and Evelyn and Kim and all of their team behind the scenes. Apologize if I missed anybody or missed any names, but the success of this whole group is based on the efforts of everybody on the call and the people that support them. So just like Ross said, you have my number. You can call me if there's any questions or you want to talk anything out. So.
Yeah, and like I'm a community member. I'm more focused on making sure we get everything we need into the system as far as making sure the job is done right, because the base information and data has to be correct. And just consider me a resource going forward on that. I'm quite innovative when it comes to figuring out some things. So,
Mr. Kelly, the one thing that's always in the back of my mind is that you want clear and accurate data. And
it's got to be right. Yeah,
I got it marked down.
Thank you.
Allowing the opportunity for a little bit more space. We got about a minute and a half left in this section, y'all. I also just wanted to add and echo the comments about, for the folks who did vote nay today, I'm happy to be supportive in facilitating those discussions and conversations. I think when we really think about consensus building, if something is a hard stop for somebody, I want to know what's going to, really get that individual from what is a hard stop to I can live with this, and or eventually, hopefully, the goal is this really works for me. And so we'll do that together. So certainly if that conversation makes sense to involve CRPC, we would love to be a part of it. If it doesn't and we can be helpful in setting up some of the logistics around it, we're happy to do that as well. Okay. I'm not hearing anything else. And just a reminder, if you want to, and when I say you, I literally mean anybody on this call, if you want to provide us with some feedback, and maybe you just want to think about it for a little bit, we do have this way on it's called a jam board. I didn't make that thing up. It's just what it's called. You can actually provide feedback. So pluses, what you liked about today, and deltas, some suggestions for how we can improve. We are looking for feedback always, and this is one way that we want to be more explicit about that. So you'll see this practice incorporated into future meetings. But I think that's all the time that we have for the public comment section. And so we'll move into the closeout part of this meeting. We got through a lot today, y'all, and I had a prep meeting with Chuck and Ross. They said, we're not going to get through that other section. Y'all were right. We did not. But we will get through that during our next meeting. So I do want to kind of just prime the pump a little bit. We are going to start to transition into project conversations. So this group, as we had mentioned in the deliverables early on, they're going to have to, the regional steering committee is going to have to really think about what does a decision-making process around project selection look like specific to round one. Round one being, if you go to the watershed.la.gov site and click on programs, there's round one projects. That's from the drop-down menu. So we're going to shift into that so that by the summer, we actually have a recommendation made available for $5 million in funding worth of projects. So we're going to make that shift on February 25th. All of the meetings for now through June have been scheduled out. So we're going to work to get those on the Watershed calendar as well as CRPC's calendar online. We are keeping with the Tuesday to Thursday as our days, as well as the 1 to 3:30 p.m. time slot. Ross and Chuck, is there anything before we do meeting minutes and adjourn?
No, I mean, I think, Chuck has done all the praises of the team that, we typically do, which again, there's so much work going on in the background and we're the beneficiaries of it. We're investing very little for what potentially could be a huge payday. So, we're getting through these milestones and, it may fall flat. We may not have a huge payday, but you know what? We're going to be set up and prepared for if these funding sources do come through. And that's the goal here, is to be prepared. And we should all want to be prepared. So I think we're getting there. Again, long way to go, but I'm excited and I'm grateful for the regional steering committee and for the consultant team. So with that, do I hear a motion to adopt the January 7 meeting minutes?
Make a motion.
Motion from Ronnie.
Earl, second.
Second from Earl. Anybody opposed? Motion passes. Anything else before we adjourn? Chuck?
Not from me.
All right. Anybody else from the regional steering committee? All right. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
This is Bridget. I make a motion to adjourn.
Motion from Bridget, second.
Second from Devin.
Second from Devin. Anybody opposed? All right. See y'all soon and have a modified Mardi Gras, and we'll see y'all in about a month or so.
Thank y'all so much. Have a great day. Also want to hope that you enjoy those house floats like Ross was talking about with the modified Mardi Gras. There we go. Bye, y'all. Thank you.
Continue at Mardi Gras, but have a designated driver as you drive around looking at the house float.
I love it.
All
right.